If you want to become a real hacker in 2026, you don't need to know thousands of tools to learn. You only need the right 20, because the truth is, most people don't fail at ethical hacking because they're not smart enough. They fail because they try to install everything, learn and understand everything, and in the end, they end up with nothing. So in this video, I'm going to show you 20 must-know tools if you want to become an ethical hacker. First, we have Wireshark. Now, Wireshark is a packet sniffer and it lets you capture and inspect raw network traffic in real time. This is important because at the end of the day, everything on a network is essentially just packets. Most beginners think hacking starts with exploits, but in reality, it starts with watching how applications talk, watching how data moves, and watching what should never be sent in the clear. With Wireshark, you may see things like login credentials, session cookies, API calls, misconfigured services, all moving across the wire. Tool number 2 is Shodan. Shodan is basically a search engine for internet connected devices, and instead of searching websites like Google, you're searching things like routers, cameras, servers, industrial systems, and so on. Basically anything that's exposed to the internet. You can instantly see thousands of systems that are publicly reachable. Some of them with weak banners, some of them badly misconfigured, and some of them that absolutely should not be online. Alright, tool number 3 is Censys. Censys is another internet-wide scanning platform, but it focuses heavily on hosts, services, and TLS certificates. Where Shodan is great for spotting exposed devices, Censys really shines at mapping attack surfaces. This matters because real organizations are generally messy. They have things like old servers, forgotten subdomains, staging environments, legacy systems, and so on. And many of these never show up in Google. With Censys, you can take a company's main domain and uncover infrastructure they didn't even remember existed. Alright, next we have Ettercap. Ettercap is a tool used for man-in-the-middle attacks on local networks. It works by poisoning ARP tables and placing your machine between a victim and the gateway. This matters because a lot of internal networks still trust anything that's already inside. No segmentation, no encryption, and no monitoring. With Ettercap, you can intercept traffic on a local network and see exactly how fragile those environments can be. You might see things like HTTP traffic, credentials, requests, and responses all flowing through your machine. Next tool is Nmap, and it is a network scanning and enumeration tool. This is one of the most important tools you will ever learn because before you exploit anything, you need to know what's listening. Nmap helps you answer questions like what hosts are alive, what ports are open, what services are running, what versions are exposed, and sometimes what operating system you're dealing with. Most real attacks don't start with exploits, they start with enumeration, and once you know what's there, you know where to focus your time. Next, we have Snort. Snort is a network intrusion detection system. Instead of attacking the network, Snort sits on the wire and watches traffic for suspicious behavior. This is really important because if you want to be a good ethical hacker, you also need to understand the defensive side. You need to know what your attacks look like on the network, what gets flagged, and what slips through. Snort works using rules and signatures, and these rules describe patterns for things like port scans, SQL injection, brute force attempts, and so on. If an attack happens, Snort can immediately fire an alert showing you exactly which rule triggered that and why. Next tool is Burp Suite. Burp Suite is a web application testing platform and an intercepting proxy. It sits between your browser and the web application and lets you see and modify every request and response. This is important because if it's a web app, this is where most attacks actually happen. You can think of things like forms, logins, APIs, session handling, and so on. And with Burp, nothing is a black box anymore. You can intercept a request, change parameters, resend it, and watch how the server responds. Once you understand how web traffic works, automating those attacks becomes much easier. Next tool is SQLmap. SQLmap is an automated SQL injection tool, and it's designed to detect and exploit SQL injection vulnerabilities in web applications. This matters because a single vulnerable input field can lead to a full database compromise. Things like users, passwords, sensitive application data can be exposed all from one weak parameter. SQLmap automates the boring and error-prone parts. does. It can test parameters for injection, identify the database type, enumerate tables and columns, and dump entire databases. Alright, next we have ffuf. This one is a fast web fuzzer and it's commonly used for directory brute forcing and parameter discovery. This tool is useful because a lot of interesting functionality like buttons, menus, or references in the UI are not linked anywhere. With ffuf, you can discover hidden admin panels, old backup files, forgotten endpoints, undocumented parameters, and so on. ffuf works by sending thousands of requests with different paths or parameters and then analyze the responses. Once you've fuzzed and mapped the web application, then you can start planning your testing approach based on what actually exists. Next tool is Nikto. Nikto is a web server vulnerability scanner and it checks web servers for dangerous files, outdated software versions, insecure configurations, and default content that should never be public. Many real-world compromises start with basic misconfigurations, not 0 days, not advanced exploits, just things that were never cleaned up. So Nikto is often used early in an assessment to quickly spot low-hanging fruits. You can find things like exposed backup files, sample applications, configuration files, risky server options, and so on. Next, we have Hydra. Hydra is an online logging brute forcing tool and it's used to test authentication on services like SSH, FTP, HTTP login forms, databases, and more. Weak passwords are still one of the most common attack vectors, and with Hydra, you can test how resistant a service is to password guessing or credential reuse. For example, if you aim Hydra at an SSH server with a word list, within seconds, you might be able to crack a weak credential. The key idea is that authentication is only as strong as its weakest password, and Hydra makes that weakness very obvious very quickly. Alright, next tool is Hashcat, and Hashcat is a password hash cracking tool. Instead of attacking a live login service like Hydra does, Hashcat works offline against captured password hashes. This is really useful because once an attacker gets hashes, there are no lockouts, no rate limits, and no alerts. Just raw compute power. And with Hashcat, you can test how strong passwords really are against dictionary attacks, rules, and brute force techniques. You may dump a set of password hashes from a database, and if you feed them into Hashcat, you can crack the passwords in minutes and sometimes even seconds. Alright, next we have Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a post-exploitation credential extraction tool which is used primarily on Windows systems. This is really useful because once you compromise one machine, you're often only one step away from much broader access. Mimikatz works by pulling credentials directly from Windows memory. You can think of things like clear text passwords, NTLM hashes, Kerberos tickets, and so on. If you run Mimikatz with the right privileges, you might extract credentials that were never written to disk, sometimes even in plain text. Next tool is the Aircrack-ng suite. Aircrack-ng is basically a collection of tools used for Wi-Fi security testing. It's used to capture wireless traffic and test the strength of wireless encryption and authentication. Wireless networks are often the easiest way into an environment by using things like weak passphrases, WPS, legacy encryption, and so on. And with Aircrack-ng, you can test things like WPA and WPA2 handshakes, weak Wi-Fi passphrases, poorly configured access points, and so on. Alright, next tool is Metasploit. Metasploit is an exploitation and post-exploitation framework. It brings scanning, exploitation, payloads, and session management into one platform. Metasploit can be really efficient because real attacks are not just one command. There's usually a flow like finding a vulnerability, choosing the right exploit, getting a shell, and then see what you can do next. Metasploit helps you connect all of that. You can search for known exploits, configure payloads, launch attacks, and manage multiple sessions. Next, we have Beef. Beef is a browser exploitation framework and it focuses on attacking the web browser itself, often through XSS and hooked clients. Beef is extremely useful because even if the server is secure, a vulnerable browser can still give an attacker leverage. With Beef, you can hook a browser during authorized testing and interact with it in real time. You can do things like triggering alerts, observing and manipulating cookies, redirecting or modifying page behavior, and so on. Next tool is SpiderFoot. SpiderFoot is an OSINT automation tool. It collects intelligence about targets using publicly available sources. A lot of attacks start before any scanning or exploitation. They start with information. And with SpiderFoot, you can automatically gather things like domains and subdomains, IP addresses and net blocks, leaked credentials and breach data, exposed services, metadata, and so on. Instead of checking dozens of sources manually, SpiderFoot pulls everything together in one place. Next tool is the Sysinternals suite. Sysinternals is a collection of Windows internals and diagnostic tools which are created to help you see what's really happening on a Windows system. Now, once you're on a machine, you need visibility, not guesses, not assumptions. You need actual insight into processes, startup items, and network activity. And with Sysinternals, you can use tools like Process Explorer to inspect running processes, autoruns to find persistence mechanisms, TCP view to see active network connections. Sysinternals tools are really useful because they help you see what's really going on under the hood of a Windows system. Next tool is OllyDbg. OllyDbg is a Windows debugger which is used for reverse engineering and binary analysis. It lets you step through a program one instruction at a time and see exactly what the code is doing. Now, not everything you deal with comes with source code, and you may come across things like malware, packed binaries, custom tools, and so on. And sometimes you have to understand them from the inside out. So with OllyDbg, you can set breakpoints, inspect registers and memory, follow program execution flow, and essentially watch how the program decides whether it should run or exit. Finally, we got Volatility. Volatility is a memory forensics framework which is used to analyze RAM dumps. Not everything on a machine ever touches the hard drive. Malware, credentials, and injected code can exist entirely in memory, hidden from regular tools. And with Volatility, you can uncover running processes, spot hidden or injected code, extract DLLs or executables, and even see network activity that never got logged to disk. For example, you might analyze a memory dump and find a malicious process that never left a trace on the file system. Alright, so those are the 20 tools you should be focusing on if you're serious about ethical hacking. Of course, these are not the only tools out there, but mastering these will give you a strong foundation across many areas of cybersecurity, from networking and web apps to exploitation, OSINT, and forensics. The key takeaway isn't to install all of them today, it's to slow down, pick a few, learn what they actually do, understand when to use them and why. If you found this helpful, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.